Hey, welcome to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg. Think about it. Our view of God determines what we think on all moral, cultural, and economic issues. It even determines how we vote. Hope for the future of our country and our world lies in our ability to make God the issue in every issue. You know, the media loves your kids. They love to influence every aspect of their lives. The culture of the United States of America is not trying to move your kids to a moral, biblically based lifestyle, but just the opposite. TV doesn't promote a biblical lifestyle. Social media doesn't do that either. Public schooling doesn't promote it. And not everyone has the flexibility to homeschool their kids. So what can you do? Today, we're going to be talking with Brad Bright about culture-proofing your kids. Wait till you hear what Brad has to say about that. Brad, thanks for being with us today.
Great to be here, Jim. Thanks.
All right, Brad, it seems like Christian parents today are fighting not just an uphill battle, but a mountainous battle. What do you think?
I mean, how many times have I heard friends say in recent years, what happened to my kids? Well, what did I do wrong? Why did my kids walk away from their faith? Here's reality. You can do everything right as a parent, and your kids can still make bad decisions. We all know that. There are no guarantees. However, there are things you can do that will greatly increase the likelihood of your kids continuing to walk with God after they leave home. But as a parent, you need to understand, first of all, what you're up against. I mean, the culture is trying to hijack your kids, as Jim referred to. So don't wait till they hit middle school. A lot of parents think that's when I really need to build into them because that's when they start thinking that's too late. It's way too late. The foundation for every decision they make is set by the time they hit their 13th birthday. You need to be building into their lives long, long before then. Otherwise, it really is almost too late.
Now, but I want to make sure that people know there's still hope if they haven't gotten started yet. There's still hope, but
there's still hope.
But that makes the uphill battle a little bit more uphill. So
it's harder. Yeah, it's just harder.
What do you think is the first thing a Christian parent should do in culture proofing their kids?
Well, this is the most important thing you can do. Absolutely the most important thing you can do is to make it a priority to develop your own relationship with God. Now, you don't have to be perfect. That's not what I'm saying. You don't have to be perfect, but you need to work to develop your relationship with God. Let your kids see that. Let your kids see the growth that goes on over time. But you need to be pursuing to know God better every day. Every day, allowing Him to empower you to learn to break free from the anxiety, the worry, the anger, all those things that beset us as humans. You need to be allowing the Spirit of God to get your focus off yourself onto Him so you can begin seeing victory over those things. Most kids turn away from their faith when they leave home for one primary reason. It's because they didn't see it working at home. They might have heard about it, but they didn't see it working. And so they walk away and goes, it didn't work for mom and dad. It didn't work for the people in my church. It won't work for me. Now then, if you want to get more into these issues of how do I make it work, go listen to my podcast on why the Christian life doesn't work. It's a mirror you can look into and you can go, oh, that's where I'm getting stuck. It'll help you identify where you're getting stuck so you can move forward.
Yes, that podcast is titled The 3 Reasons a Christian Life Does Not Work, and it's podcast number 16 of the God is the Issue podcast. All right, Brad, what would you say is the biggest challenge that Christian parents face today? The biggest in all of this uphill battle, what's the biggest one?
There are so many things working against you as a parent. Social media, Hollywood, but as big as those are, I think the biggest one working against you are the public schools. So public schools, and there's a reason why. From the age of 5 until 18, your children spend more time at school than they do with you. That is unless you homeschool. So if they go to public school, that's a huge problem. So let me ask you a question. Ask yourself, what did my child learn about God in public school this last year?
Well, they learned His name could be combined with several other words. They learned about Jesus, too. They learned His name could be assigned to other words. I don't think they really learned much about God, but just how to use His name.
Yeah. So what did they learn in the last 5 years? Now then, other than how to misuse the name of God, what did they learn? Now, then you're probably thinking, well, they really learned nothing. And that's not true. They learned something very concrete about God. And what was it? The short answer is that God is irrelevant to my life. You see, every subject they sat in that was taught, they learned about it without reference to God. Math, science, history, literature, all those things they learned without reference to God. And so after 13 years of that, they come to the conclusion that God is irrelevant to all these other things. God's just irrelevant to my daily life. I'll tell you what, it's deadly. It happens. Go listen to my podcast on public education where I really unpack how that works and some of the experiences I've seen parents have. And I'll go into detail about what your kids are encountering every day. I encourage everyone to listen so they understand what is happening to their kids. But parenthetically, let me say, putting your kids in Christian school helps, but it's no guarantee either. I mean, most Christian schools are permeated by the culture. Jim, let me ask you, if you had to guess, what percentage of students in Christian schools today are actually Christians? What would you say? Just a wild guess.
Yeah, here's the deal. I taught in a Christian school for a year, so I'm guessing 50% or less.
Yeah. And that's a reasonable guess. But all the statistics I've seen is it's about 10%. 10% are actually think like Christians. Now, I'm not talking about have they prayed a prayer of salvation. I mean Christian beliefs. I said this to a friend of mine one day, and he had 4 kids, and his daughter was 17. She was in high school. And so he took her out on daddy-daughter date that Saturday morning, the following Saturday. And as they were sitting there, he said, honey, how many of your peers in school would you say are actually Christians? She said, well, Daddy, when I first started, I would have probably said about half. But you know what? I think it's only about 10%. And my friend said, my jaw dropped off my face. He said, Brad, you're right. What do we do?
We need to teach Christian educators how to actually build the gospel into everything they do. Yeah, I want to make sure you mentioned our podcast that we did on public education. That was God is the Issue podcast shows number 8 and 9 as you're researching through our archives of past podcasts. Brad, it's staggering to know that our kids are under such incredible attack. And it's also important for us as parents to understand that the family is the power against this. And we're going to talk about that when we get into the next segment. You're listening to the God is the Issue podcast as we talk about culture-proofing your kids. Hang on, and we'll be right back.
Want to know more about how you can make God the issue in every issue? Get your copy of Brad's book, God is the Issue. Now in its 3rd edition, you can get your ebook copy at brightmedia.org. Even better, if you subscribe to this podcast, you'll receive a coupon for 1 free download of God is the Issue ebook. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, and get God is the Issue ebook today.
Hey, welcome back to the God is the Issue podcast as we talk about culture-proofing your kids. Is it really possible? And how do we make God the issue in this issue? All right. Brad, well, you start us off here.
Well, yeah, here's where I really want to go with this.
Okay.
What is it what do you have to do, and what's not as important? Well, I want to start the conversation by asking this one question. When they teach tellers and FBI agents how to spot counterfeit currency, what do? How do they spot counterfeit currency? Do you know?
Yeah, I do, because my sister has worked in the banking industry for 40 years. They make them handle cash. They make them count cash. They make them feel cash. They're constantly playing with cash. And then every once in a while, they'll slip in a counterfeit one. And because their tactile senses are so trained to understand what cash really feels like, when the counterfeit one comes through, they can sense it. Now, in today's world, that is not perfect because thieves have gotten really good. But for the most part, it's just the senses. They can see, touch, feel, and smell and tell the difference.
That's right. It's first touch, but then they can see it. They can look at it. Once a teller agent knows what a dollar bill feels like, what it's supposed to look like, they can quickly spot 99 out of 100 counterfeit bills without taking any other actions. And I mean, it's incredible. It's because they know what the real thing feels like and looks like. Well, using that same principle, what do you think is the most important thing to teach your children so they can spot the lies that culture tells them? What's the most important thing? I mean, let me answer that question with another question. What is the primary purpose of the Bible? What's the primary purpose? Is it to teach us what God wants us to do? Or would you say it's to teach us right from wrong? To teach us how to follow God? Or to teach us who God is? What is the primary purpose of the Bible?
To teach us who God is. I mean, that's the primary purpose of the Bible, isn't it?
That is it. Exactly, it is. Because here's why. If you don't understand who God is, you can't trust him, right? And if you can't trust him, the Christian life will never work for you. So, if the primary purpose of the Bible is to teach us who God is, then isn't our primary purpose as parents teach our kids who God is? I mean, if they understand who God is, they're going to be less likely to be deceived by the culture, right?
Absolutely. They're going to be, but parents are that way too. I mean, how many of them actually read their Bibles to know who God is? Oh boy, there's a soapbox. It's your show, but boy, I could jump on that soapbox in a heartbeat. They got to work on this.
That's a problem.
Yeah, it's a problem. All right. So how on earth does the average parent do this? Help their kids to be less deceived? How do they culture-proof their kids? It sounds like you have to be a theologian in order to raise your kids. I think that most of your listeners are probably out there saying, I don't have a clue how to do this.
Well, glad you asked, because I'm going to give you a few tools you can use, and not only will you help your kids, but actually you'll find it helps you as well. Because it's a very, very simple process. You don't have to be a theologian. Any parent can do it, and you'll learn right along with your kids. And here's what I want you to do. Is you go read a Bible story, right? Kids love stories. They're a very concrete thing. As young kids love stories. Go read a Bible story and ask them 5 questions. Now, full disclosure, these questions are not original with me. I took them from New Generations Ministries. And that they know I've chatted with them about it. They said, great, Brad, go use them. So we're using them. But I just want you to know where they came from. So you read your kids a Bible study, then ask them 5 questions. 5 questions. First question is, what does it say? Can you read them a Bible story and then ask your child, well, what does it say, Tommy? What does it say, Sally? And they tell you. Then you say, well, what do you think it means? Oh, well, I think it means this. Now, they don't have to get it right every time. But the point is to get them asking that question. What does it mean? And then ask the third question. This is a critical question. What did you learn about God from this story? Oh, and they tell you what they think they learned about God. And then you say, well, Tommy, Sally, how do you think you can apply this? What can you do with this story? How can you apply that to your own life? What difference will that make in your life? And let them think through that. Now, if they're younger, they may need a little help from mom and dad, thinking how they could apply that to their life. But it's just nothing complex, just a simple application. Well, I guess it means when I go to bed at night, maybe I should talk to God, or maybe that way I know God loves me even when my friends at school don't. Just a simple application. Then the last one is, who can you tell? Now, the reason we go to this last one is we don't want to help you raise your kids to be self-focused. We want to help you raise your kids to be other-focused. So after they apply it to their own life, say, who do you know that would be encouraged or needs to know this about God? And why don't you tell them that when you go to school tomorrow, or your brother or your sister or someone, why don't you tell them that? So it's, what does it say? What does it mean? What did it teach you about God? What can you do? And who can you tell? If you can read a Bible story and ask those 5 questions, you can teach your kids who God is. And by the way, when you're done, make sure you just end in prayer. Just with a little prayer. Your kids need to see you model that for them. You pray, and then have them pray as you think they're ready to pray. Because if they see you praying, they're going to want to pray too.
All right, I think we need to get practical. Not that that's not practical. Those 5 questions are fantastic, but show me what this looks like. I mean, let's take the story of David and Goliath. Apply this to David and Goliath. We know the story. David is watching the sheep. His brothers are off at the front facing the Philistines. His dad sends him with cheese and meat and bread or whatever it was to the front line to feed his brothers, so they had a lunch for the day. And David shows up and overhears Goliath going, "Who is the wimp that's going to come out and fight me? I defy the armies of God." And David goes, "How dare you?" And he goes to the king. He says, "I want to fight him." And the king says, "Here's my armor." And David goes, "I can't wear this armor." And he goes out and he grabs what he's comfortable with, which is 3 pebbles, throws them in his pouch, and he gets his sling and he chases it. He runs up to Goliath and he takes his sling out and he slings his sling and he hits Goliath in the only spot in his armor where he didn't have any coverage. He knocks Goliath out. He goes up, grabs Goliath's sword, chops his head off, and then the Israelites rout the Philistines in victory. Okay.
You just answered the first question. What does it say? What is it? You just answered that question. What does it say? That's the first question. That's all. And that's all we want your kids to do. That's all you want your kids to do. And they don't even have to have it that much detail. You just want them to get to repeat back to you what did it say. So, Jim, tell me, what does it mean? As you read it, what does it mean? What did you learn from that? What's just one simple thing you learned from that a child might have learned?
That God spent years teaching David how to face big opponents so that when he actually faced one that was significantly formidable, that talked to him, he was ready.
Yeah, that's one lesson you learn because David had fought bears and lions, and God had allowed him to beat the bear and lion, so it built his confidence, right? So now here's a giant even bigger, but David's already defeated a lion and bear as he's out tending sheep. So this is just another lion or bear that God put in front of David. Yeah, that's a great thing to learn from that. So from there, what did that teach you about God, Jim? If you're a child, what does that story teach you about God?
That when I face giants, if I've got faith, God will help me have victory over the giants.
Yeah, real simple. It's a very simple concept. So, Jim, what should you do with that, or what can you do with it?
Every time I face a giant, I need to stop and just say, "Okay, God, I'm facing a giant. What do I do?" But
and if
again, but God had already trained David what to do. He knew it because God had been preparing him for years as a shepherd.
So, if you're 8 or 9 years old, what's something you could do with that?
Well, the giants in our lives as 8 or 9-year-olds are typically the bullies in the hallways at school or at church and Sunday school or on the street or whatever.
It can be the bullies, yeah. But, I don't know that we want to get a sling.
I was just going to that.
Take them out.
If I'd had a sling, I'd have taken some bullies out when I was 8 or 9 because I had some bullies in my life. But I think it's to understand that God can fight our battles because there is, when you look at the historical context of this, Goliath was about 9 feet tall. He had armor covering all of his body except a little spot on his forehead. Everything else was covered. And God took that stone and put it right in the right place. The odds of it were staggering.
Mm-hmm. It was. So here's the thing. The giants in our life are the problems we face, right? Those are the problems we face. And so for Tommy or Sally, it's like, are you viewing this as a problem or are you viewing this as an opportunity to see God work like David did? And then it's really that simple. And I unpack that concept more in other podcasts. Then the final one is, well, Tommy, Sally, who can you tell? Well, who of your friends or maybe brothers and sisters would be encouraged by hearing this? And then they can say, well, my friend next door is kind of a little discouraged. Maybe I can tell him the story of David and Goliath too. Keep it simple. Let's not overcomplicate it. And if they come off with some harebrained idea, don't slap them down for it. Just the point is to teach them to ask those questions. And because in the long haul, it's going to build a phenomenal basis in their life. So, yeah, point is, if you do this, you're going to help build a strong foundation in your child that will put them in great stead for life. And frankly, it's going to start building a deeper foundation in years too. I wish I'd known these 5 questions when we were raising our kids. It would have made my life a lot easier.
It would have made it easier. We're talking today about culture-proofing your kids, and we all want to do that. But the deal is, when our kids leave the house, we're not done parenting. We just do it through friendship. It's not over until the whole game is over. You're listening to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright, and we'll be right back.
Brad Bright travels the country speaking and training people how to make God the issue in every issue. Go to brightmedia.org, that's brightmedia.org, to find out how you can bring Brad's highly interactive workshop to your area. It's fun, engaging, and most important, it will help make you more effective in making God the issue in every issue. Go to brightmedia.org That's brightmedia.org and schedule Brad today.
Hey, welcome back to the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. Brad, what a great conversation. Just the practical, tactical, factual, and biblical ways to look at practical ways to take the Bible, stories from the Bible, and make them culturally relevant, because we're talking about culture proofing our kids. That's pretty easy. Those 5 questions again were, what did the Bible, not the Bible story, because it's really history, but what did it say?
What does it say?
What does it mean? What does it teach you about God? What can you do and who can you tell? It's pretty easy. Is there anything else parents can do?
Well, we've actually created a couple resources for parents, easy to use. One is this little book. Can we see it here? It's Because God is Awesome. And it's really for 5 to 10-year-olds. My wife and I wrote it together to really help teach children who God is and why it matters. There's over 100,000 of these in print now. And it's really designed to help you as a parent have a conversation about who God is and why it matters with your kids. Now, our target audience is 5 to 10-year-olds. But you can bring in the older kids into that in that process as well, or the younger kids. You can get a copy through brightmedia.org. The other thing is at brightmedia.org, we're going to have for you the Discover God for Kids component of the website that will give you a ton of resources to help teach your kids who God is, why it matters. It'll have devotionals, activities, questions to ask your kids, so that as a parent, you have a resource to draw on for help teaching your children who God is. Folks, it's the first and most important step to culture-proofing your kids. Teach your kids who God is, okay? If you do that, you're well on the way. Again, there's no guarantees, but this is huge in helping to culture-proof your kids.
Go out to brightmedia.org, brightmedia.org, and get access to those resources. All right. Besides walking your kids through what the Bible has to tell them and reading scripture and discussing with them, is there anything else that we can do in order to culture-proof our kids?
Oh, yeah. And I know a lot of parents are going to groan at this one, but I can't tell you how critical it is. Okay, are you ready? It's to have dinner with your kids 3 to 4 nights a week. Now, I know as they start getting into their teen years in the middle school, that becomes problematic. I know a number of parents are groaning right now in our listening audience. I know they are, because we've been there. But every study I've seen says the best way to pass on your values to your kids is to have dinner with them. The dinner table is the most important moment of the day if you want to pass your values on to your kids. Now, I know a lot of our listeners are saying, I can't do that. But here's what I want you to do for me. If you're one of those folks, I want you to close your eyes and envision for a moment your child, your son, your daughter, coming to you when they turn 21 and saying, Mom, Dad, God's irrelevant to my life. God is irrelevant to my life. How are you going to feel?
You're going to want to vomit.
I mean, there are no guarantees. You may do everything right, and your kids may turn their back on God still. But don't let it be because you didn't do your part.
Yeah, Brad, in order to have dinner 3 or 4 nights a week, and my goal was to do it all but one night a week with our own kids, you have to make some sacrifices.
You sure do.
Your kids have to make sacrifices, number one, to understand that they're not going to get to be in every sport that they want to be in. Mm-hmm. And as a parent, you're going to have to make sacrifices because you need to be done and home from work and be at that dinner table. I mean, it's a commitment and it's a change of lifestyle, and it's totally countercultural, which is why we're talking about culture proofing our kids. Brad, the average parent is already overwhelmed. I mean, they're overwhelmed with so many things, especially if they have teenagers, because teenagers are stretching. You just made their lives more challenging. Did you and Kathy accomplish this? Did you guys actually succeed at having dinner around the table 3 to 4 nights a week?
We did, and here is why. One, first and foremost, we decided it was a non-negotiable. It was a non-negotiable. And if it's a non-negotiable, it means other things had to be sacrificed, and they were. For instance, we only allowed our kids to be involved in one extracurricular activity per semester. Throughout middle school and high school, they could only be involved in one. That means they had to make some hard choices. Now, as parents, we helped them make the hard choices, but they made the choice. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't always easy, but because it was a non-negotiable, we figured out how to make it happen.
Looking back, would you say it was worth it? Would you do something differently?
It was worth it. It was well worth it. The only thing I do differently, Jim, is I do more of the same. I do more of the same. I'll tell you what. Let me tell you today. Both of our kids got great scholarships to private schools. Because they applied themselves. They did well at the things they were doing. We stayed engaged with them. And so they excelled scholastically. But even more important, they both love Jesus to this day. They both love Jesus. Our daughter just married a great young man just about 4 months ago, who also loves Jesus. Our son is a college professor. As a dad, I couldn't be any prouder of them or more grateful to God. The bottom line is, as parents, we had one primary job, and that's our kids. That was to help our kids know who God really, really was and how that impacted every area of their life. And it's on that foundation we built their lives so that every decision they make in life now is built on that. This foundation is determined by that. So my question for you is, what foundation are you laying in your child's life? The culture's trying to lay a different foundation. What foundation are you putting into their lives?
Great conversation, Brad, about culture-proofing our kids. Walking through the Bible with them and asking those 5 questions and having dinner together. 2 powerful concepts, super easy to implement, really hard to keep going. Brad Bright, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Jim.
And thanks for joining us today on the God is the Issue podcast with Brad Bright. Remember to check us out online. Lots of great resources out there. brightmedia.org, brightmedia.org. And remember, as you're having these conversations, always be kind, compassionate, and shrewd while making God the issue in every issue.